All right, just stop the terrible blooming, the oversaturated colors, the screen tearing, the crushing the black levels on your monitor, and learn how to calibrate your display on this video. Now, I'm constantly getting asked questions about calibrations and how to fix this motion problem and this pixel response rate issue and so on and so forth. The list is endless. I have received many questions recently, specifically because I've been posting a lot of monitor videos, but I commonly get questions around how do I fix this problem? How do I fix that problem? And that's why I made this video, because hopefully I can address some of those issues. This can apply to pretty much any other monitor out there. That being said, there's no one remedy for each individual problem. This may only help in one scenario, and you may have to go and dive deeper to find a solution for your problem. That being said, there are two resources I'll give you for that. Number one, you can post down in the comments if you have a problem that you're not able to fix. The second is we have a great Facebook group called Only Nerds by Techcessory. There's quite a few people in there. It's growing. If it's a longer form question, you can put it up there. Even if you don't get a response right away, somebody's going to respond, and hopefully we can get some resources out there for you. So we're going to be covering 4 things today and a calibration. That calibration is going to be with no purchase required. You don't need any special hardware. You're not going to be paying someone to do it, and you do not need an app on your phone. So we're going to cover that at the end of the video, but we have 4 topics specifically around blooming, motion capability, pixel response rate, black level performance, oversaturation. Those are the 4 main things we're going to be talking about today. So let's dive in and get into the first, which is blooming. Okay, so a lot of people talked about this issue and brought it up on some of the LG panels that I've reviewed. It's known as blooming. It's where when you have like a white text, black background, you're seeing like this halo effect around the actual text, or you see in the corners that the backlighting is too bright in the corners or not bright enough. So it kind of over enhances that area where there's actually no image present. So there's a couple ways you can kind of fix this. Traditionally, this is going to be within the monitor settings. And the first thing you do want to check for is some sort of black level adjustment that you have. More than likely, it will not be found in your contrast or your brightness, although those things will help mitigate it. It's usually in that black level adjustment. So go see if you have that first, like I did within my settings. You can kind of see that as I kind of move that black level slider around, what happens is that background doesn't become as hazy. The actual lighting in the back by itself is not too bright, but I can adjust it perfectly. And then I can go in and fine tune the sharpness. I can fine tune the contrast so that I'm not blowing out the white text or whatever image it is that is causing that blooming effect. I'm not blowing it out, but those can typically be found in contrast, in sharpness, and in your black level adjustment. So if you're having that issue, that's what you want to do, just like I did on the video. Okay, the second is going to be oversaturation. Like I reviewed the Pixio PXC327, and out of the box, the saturation, the color accuracy was off, and it did require a good amount of calibration, which obviously we'll go through at the end of the video. If you run into that problem where your colors are oversaturated, it probably means a couple of things. Number one, your color vibrance or saturation is way up. I mean, probably way higher than it needs to be. The other would be like gamma correction. So your gamma is probably on the wrong setting. The other is going to be sharpness being too high. Now, there are some ways to kind of calibrate this out. There's more than just those settings that can cause oversaturation or inaccurate colors, but typically where you'll find it, like I do in the video, is I make sure that my color vibrance is turned down, or my color saturation is turned down. And then I want to go into like my gamma and make sure that I'm not getting some weird tinge of green out of the gamma that I have set. I want it to be normal looking, what I would see in person or naturally. And then sharpness. Sharpness, I kind of found after playing through the settings, would actually contribute to that color being oversaturated. For whatever reason, the processor tells the panel when the sharpness is way up that it really needs to pull out the color in order to give you a sharper pixel. And that's not always the case. I mean, take for example, this video on YouTube is 4K, kind of highly saturated video to begin with. And as I kind of pull down some of those over enhanced features, you're actually picking up detail. There's these little flakes in what I call the paint color that actually get pulled out and extracted through having the right sharpness and the right vibrance / saturation levels. So you're actually losing out on detail when you're oversaturated. Okay, the next is going to be crushing black levels. And like I have in this example, both with Borderlands and with Call of Duty, we'll start with Call of Duty. If your black levels are being crushed, what that means is the detail in the shadow or dark areas cannot be seen. So, you know, little texture details within a rock, right? Or within somebody's vest that they're wearing in the game, or their camo, whatever they're wearing, you can't really make out any of the detail. The problem with that in game is you wouldn't necessarily be able to see somebody who's kind of hiding in a corner or maybe blends in with a particular rock or shadow point on a tree line. So you definitely want to have the detail pulled out enough, but not so much that you're over enhancing it and blowing out the image, because then you get a hazy image. So it's a fine line, and you can see that with Call of Duty, that you really do have to dial in that black level setting, kind of like the blooming deal, the contrast, and the brightness. So those are kind of your three settings. So the black level, contrast, brightness. And the same can kind of be said for Borderlands. However, at least on my panel, this Gigabyte M28U, with Borderlands, I have to set it a little bit differently. My contrast was actually higher for Borderlands because it's a highly saturated game. So for whatever reason, it just means more contrast. So I know when I jump into that game, if I want the best performance possible, I gotta pop that contrast up. And then it actually starts to pull out the detail on those dark levels without over enhancing them to the point where I can actually see what's going on in the shadow areas of the game. So just like I did on my monitor, go through, make sure that your black level settings are good, make sure that your contrast is good, make sure that your brightness is good. Let's move on. The next is going to be motion, specifically around like variable refresh rate, screen tearing, and input lag. So if you clicked on this video and you're getting a lot of screen tearing and glitching and stuttering and all this good stuff, you know, the main culprit of that is going to be the level of performance you have the game set at and what your graphics card can handle. So first and foremost, you want to make sure that your graphics settings are appropriate for not only the GPU that you have, but the display. But I'm going to give an example here. So I'm maxing out my 3090, which is pretty tough to do, but I turned DLSS off, and then I kind of maxed out all my settings and over enhanced a few things and turned off the FreeSync Premium on the monitor, the M28U by Gigabyte, and went into game. And I'm getting like 60 frames per second. What you see as I pan around and start moving is it's terribly glitchy. I mean, it is motion blur heavy, and the pixel response rate is terrible. There's a bit of screen tearing. So you may have just opened up a new monitor and you're experiencing this because you haven't tuned it to your graphics card or your game. So what you're gonna wanna do is, first and foremost, go to your monitor and make sure that whatever variable refresh rate technology you have, make sure that's on. We've enabled whatever VRR technology we're using, whatever sync technology you're using. The next thing you want to do is dial in your pixel response rate. So that's going to be like your overdrive setting, pixel response time, or just called response time. And you probably have anywhere from low to high. This Gigabyte does it a little bit different. They do it based on like the experience you want to have. So they have balance, they have graphic, they have smart overdrive. For this one, I chose smart overdrive. But for you, it could be like medium. Start out with medium, start out with high, depending on your frames per second. Medium would be like 60 frames. High would be anything above 100 frames. Well, that's awesome. I can do all those things, but I'm still only gonna be getting 60 frames per second in game. Now what you're gonna wanna do is go into the actual game that you're playing, like I do in Call of Duty here, and scale down some of your graphics settings. So anything that utilizes a lot of VRAM, pull that down a bit, right? Or if you're using a 30 series card, you can take advantage of NVIDIA's DLSS technology. If you enable it for the resolution display that you have, it's actually going to give you higher frames in game using the same exact settings. So it's kind of a cheat. Maybe not so much for like a 3060, 3060 Ti, but definitely 3070 and up. You're gonna almost double your frames by adding or turning on DLSS. But if you don't have a 30 series card, just whatever is going to take up the most VRAM, take it down a box or two. Try to get yourself to a good, reasonable amount of frames. So like 100 frames per second. Like I showed a couple examples of things that do take up heavy VRAM in Call of Duty. Once you do that, you can go back into your game, make sure that your pixel response rate is still doing good. Make sure that your VRR technology is on. I'm telling you, it will be butter. If it's screen tearing, it's going to be related to your frames per second and what variable refresh rate technology you're using. If you are getting a lot of motion blur, that is going to be highly tied to your pixel response rate. So dial that in. Depending on the issue you're having, dial them in, you'll be good to go. Okay, on to the calibration, you guys. I do want to let you know that the settings I'm using in this video are, of course, specific to this M28U by Gigabyte here. But if you're using any other monitor, not a problem. You can follow this 3-step process with any monitor out there on the market. I mean, heck, you could pretty much do it with a TV as well. The settings are just going to be vastly different. So if you have a gaming monitor in front of you that you're trying to troubleshoot and maybe calibrate, use this 3-step process coming up and you will get similar results to what I have. I mean, take a before and after, which I'll show you at some point, of this monitor, and you'll see the same on yours, or at least similar. I'm not going to make any guarantees here, but it's worked for me on every single monitor that I've used it on, which is pretty much every monitor that I've put on the channel ever. So, and any monitor that I buy for personal use. So it speaks for itself, you guys. So let's jump in. There's a 3-step process, and we're going to start by opening up your favorite game. So whatever that game is, mine is Borderlands 3, as you can see up on the display. I love the colors. I love the way it reacts to the calibrations that I do because it's vastly different depending on the settings that I choose. So find something that has like a character with maybe some landscape views or an opponent, somewhere that, you know, is going to be seen constantly throughout the game. So once you do that, you're going to want to do a couple things within the monitor settings themselves. First and foremost is you're going to want to max out your brightness and your contrast to 100%, and I'll tell you why later. As you go down the list within your monitor settings, you're gonna see things like the 6-axis color, your color enhancer or saturation, you're going to see sharpness, color temp, and then maybe you'll see 2 other settings like local dimming or black level adjustment or black equalizer. Now, there's no specific rule for each one of these. What I want you to do is be able to calibrate to what your eyes say is good to look at. Now, what I compare them to, what I compare these settings to, is what I would see if I were in that environment. So again, kind of going back to the previous things we talked about, we do not want to crush blacks. We do not want to over enhance or over saturate colors. And we definitely don't want to over enhance white. So anything that's going to be very bright, we want to make sure we are not over enhancing and getting blooming or washing out our display. So you can go back to those particular points in the video and adjust the settings that I mentioned to the problem that you're having. But just a quick review, quick refresher. What I tend to do is I tend to match up the 6-axis color to natural colors. I take that color vibrance and I adjust it up and I adjust it down and I see how that affects my picture. So then I maybe bring it down a notch or 2 or up a notch or 2 depending on the game that I'm playing. Borderlands, I typically have my color saturation or vibrance up a little bit higher than in Call of Duty because I just like the color that it gives me. And then I want to go to color temp. I like a softer color temperature, so I typically do warm. For me, it's easier to look at, it's not as straining to the eyes, and it actually takes away a lot of the blue color that gets overlaid in like your brightest setting. Now, the last two are important. Local dimming. If you have a panel that has local dimming, this essentially is going to take away your ability to change brightness. It gives all ability to dimming and brightening to the actual processor on the panel. That's good for content like 4K content and things like that. I don't think it's as good for video games. They're pretty fast paced. The lighting panel may not be able to keep up with it. And sometimes you're calibrating more for your environment than you are for the game that you're playing. The second potential setting you may have is, again, that black equalizer. I showed you in the other recommendations that I made based on the problems you're having that black equalizer is very, very important. There are some budget monitors that don't have it, but once again, make sure you're not over enhancing shadows and black detail, but also make sure you're not crushing the detail as well. So a nice balance in between. Okay, so remember when I said set your contrast and your brightness at 100%. So the second step of this process is opening up the Windows color calibration tool. This calibration tool helps you calibrate three things. You notice there's one I didn't mention and one I didn't have you do in the previous calibration, and that's gamma. So you're going to be calibrating for brightness, contrast, and gamma in the Windows calibration tool. Extremely solid, works really well. As you can see in the video here, I go through, I do the gamma first. Now that you've done gamma, you're going to go through and you're going to do brightness and contrast. Just match it up to what Windows says. Try to get the picture in the middle to look like the picture you have when you're calibrating, and everything should be pretty dang good. So if we do that, we can do the third step, which is open up the game to the same kind of scenery that you had before and make sure that all of those settings that you used took place. You know, make sure you're still getting good detail. Make sure the panel's not too dark. Make sure the color isn't oversaturated. So if you do all those things and you open up your game, you should see, like I have here, a nice, good quality video, image, game, whatever you want to call it, or whatever you calibrated to. You should see great performance. Now, I do have to warn that that's specific to the game. So maybe you want to save those settings in like a custom setting slot if you're going to change games and want to change those settings. That way you can just revert right back to those settings. One last thing I'll say is I included these 4 kind of troubleshooting steps and a calibration because the questions I get are constantly changing, but those 4 seem to be pretty dang common. And all of those things are a result of poor calibration. So if you calibrate properly, whether it's the onboard menus that you have on your desktop, the in-game settings, your graphics card settings, and your display settings, both color and motion alike, you're gonna have a great experience through and through. And the problems that you have related to motion blur, pixel response rate, bad color, highly saturated color, dark panel, bright panel, blooming, all of that is gonna go away for the most part as long as you have a good quality panel or a great calibration. And if it's still occurring, the chance is that maybe you're a little too picky for the monitor that you have, and you need to upgrade to something that gives you better color accuracy, better lighting, better contrast, so on and so forth. So if you have any questions, for sure put it down below. I've calibrated tons of displays. I can definitely help. And as always, we do have our group on Facebook, Only Nerds by Techccessory. If you have a long form question, put it in there. Somebody will definitely help you out. And please subscribe. We definitely like when new subscribers hit that button. It helps contribute to the growth of the channel and allows us to keep going. So without further ado, you guys, I will catch you in the next video.